The day the Legion's vanguard slid out of the Crescent Nebula, the sky looked bruised, like someone had pressed a thumb against the firmament. That was how we knew the telescopes weren't lying. Something huge had warped space on approach, and it wasn't decelerating. On Pyre 4, news traveled at the speed of sweaty messengers and grease-smudged loudspeakers, so within an hour the whole colony, 38,000 souls scattered across basalt cliffs and dust fields, had heard the same two words crackle over every public address horn. MacMen at all. If we could win, we were a mining settlement stitched together out of crash-landed transports and cargo containers, and our entire standing military consisted of a few dozen volunteers who drilled on Sundays firing worn coilguns that dated back to the Exodus fleet. The Legion, by contrast, was rumor turned flesh. An off-books mercenary armada funded by one of the charter houses, fully automated dreadnoughts, combat mechs with quantum shutters, infantry in adaptive armor. They specialized in reclamation, which was a polite word for repossession by force. Someone back on Earth Prime must have realized Pyra's tungsten veins were worth the fuel to fetch them, so we held a meeting in the slag pit behind Hab Complex 2. Camber Reyes, former orbital tug pilot, and our de facto mayor, stood on a rusted ore hopper and called for quiet. Wind moaned through iron struts. The smell of soot was thick enough to chew. "We have 72 hours, Camber announced. "That's time to finish one job." A murmur rolled over the crowd, fear seeking somewhere to anchor. "We rewire whatever guns we have left," she continued, "and we light the mirrors." Everyone stared at her. The guns were a joke. We used them to launch sensor buoys, and half their superconducting loops were patched with scavenged radio wire. As for the mirrors, those were relics. A lattice of broken solar reflectors once meant to power an orbital furnace project that ran out of funding decades ago. They'd drifted uselessly ever since, shards of glass chasing elliptical orbits like fallen feathers. She waited until the whispers died. "We can fold, or we can fight," she said. "If we fight on our terms, with what we understand. Iron, magnets, sunlight." She jabbed a finger skyward. "And we make the Legion pay for every meter of ground." No one cheered, but no one left. We set to work. I was a machinist, one of the lucky few who could still coax the old autoforges into forging anything finer than shovel blades. My shift started at dusk in Bay 4A, under failing sodium lamps that turned every face jaundiced. The coilguns, termed mass drivers in the manuals, were 6-meter barrels mounted on concrete pillars outside the loading docks. A century back, they'd flung cargo pods to low orbit. Time had pitted the rails and corroded the power couplings. Our job was to get them humming again and feed them something lethal. "Slug dimensions?" asked Yara Matsuo, the rail chief, squinting at a cracked blueprint. 10-centimeter tungsten rods, shaved to a needle tip, I replied. "If the capacitors hold, we can push 3 kilometers per second. 3's not enough to breach Legion armor." "Ricochet them," I said. "Skip plates sideways across hulls. The kinetic shear will peel ceramic faster than a straight punch." Yara nodded. We began machining. In the next bay, welders spliced capacitors ripped from mining sleds. Electric arcs flashed like captive lightning. The smell of ozone fought with the tang of coolant, and over everything pulsed the dull thud of bootstrap generators cycling up. Every time I glanced at the clock, another hour had vanished. Meanwhile, Camber's mirror team cannibalized anything that would reflect sunlight. Outdated station panels, the polished interfaces of grain silos, even children's discarded toys. Engineers used pulse thrusters from decommissioned landers to herd the fragments into crude parabolic arrays. None of the mirrors were perfect. Half were warped like funhouse glass. But when we patched the feeds to a surface scope, we saw flecks of silver coalescing above Pyron like an angry halo. "If we align them," said Camber, "we get a weapon the size of an ocean storm, not a scalpel." A sledgehammer. The Legion arrived on schedule. Their lead craft, a scorpion-shaped cruiser, braked hard at 20,000 meters, its hull glowing torch-white. It deployed aerofoils that reconfigured mid-descent, never once bucking to turbulence. Through binoculars, I saw their emblem, a crimson triangle inset with a gear. Below, the colony sirens wailed, a sound that made children clamp their hands to their ears, and adults reach for tools repurposed as weapons. Camber broadcast one demand on all frequencies. Withdraw. This site is sovereign under Exodus Charter Clause 9. The Legion's reply was an audio file, laughter synthesized and looping. Then the shooting started. Their atmospheric fighters' sleek mantiforms sliced in at Mach 4, scattering chaff that jammed anything emitting a signal. We fought blind, plotting trajectories with slide rules and gut instinct. The coilguns thumped, each discharge hammering cracks through the pillars. Every shot was a gamble that the rails wouldn't melt. Tungsten needles streaked upward, invisible until they kissed contrails and bloomed vapor. One fighter pirouetted, half a wing missing, and smacked into a mesa. The others learned quickly. They wove corkscrews, spat micro-missiles, strafed. During a lull, I sprinted across the yard, radio pressed to my ear, static, then Camber's voice. Mirror control reports convergence in 40 minutes. Hold until then. The Legion wouldn't give us that time. Dropships fell next, armored coffins trailing ion tails. They disgorged infantry in exosuits that looked like molten glass. Rail slugs pinged off them like hailstones. Our militia farmers, drivers, welders filled machine pistols and hunting lasers that barely scorched the paint. Still, for every colonist that fell, the rest pressed forward, throwing thermal charges, jamming hydraulics with pry bars, cracking visors with sledgehammers. The ground became a scrapyard of shattered alloy and spilled human blood. We got cornered behind an ore conveyor by 2 Legion troopers. One leveled a grav rifle, the other advanced with a plasma cutter humming white-hot. I had nothing but a machining hammer. Before they fired, a coilgun salvo screamed overhead. The rail slug punched the ridge behind us, erupting obsidian shards. The blast wave knocked all 3 of us flat. I recovered first and drove my hammer through the nearest visor. The suit went rigid. The second trooper staggered up, but a teenager named June slipped behind him and welded the suit's joints shut with a cutting torch. We left them twitching, grabbed their discarded rifles, and ran. Above, the mirrors began to glow. Every legend about solar weapons says the first thing you notice is the light. That's wrong. What you notice is the shadow. Everything around you snaps into razored chiaroscuro, as if some cosmic giant flicked the contrast dial. Our cobbled array gorged on Pyre 5's orange sun, focused and spat it back as a pillar of incandescence. The beam lanced atmosphere, blooming concentric halos of plasma. Legion sensors must have screamed. One fighter evaporated mid-roll, one moment a sleek manta, the next a smear of spark and smoke. Another lost both wings and spun down like a pinwheel, taking its pilot's last scream with it. But the mirrors weren't stable. They were patchwork at best. A gust of solar wind nudged a 10-meter segment 2 arc-seconds off target, and the beam sheared sideways, carving a molten trench through uninhabited desert. Close enough that our seismographs jittered. Camber radioed frantic corrections. Up there, technicians wearing vacuum suits nudged thrusters, keyed with duct tape arrows. They were gambling their orbits, their oxygen, everything they had to hold the array online. The Legion's response was immediate, a barrage of angel flak. Brilliant mag-race flechettes detonating into clouds of reflective dust meant to scatter the beam. Our light weapon flickered, punched holes, flickered again. Camber cursed, coilguns barked, trying to clear the cloud with kinetic sweeps, tungsten plowing through dust like plows through snow. Every time the beam got through, it tore a chunk from a cruiser hull. Every time it faltered, Legion landers advanced another kilometer. Night seemed a forgotten myth. The sky was a forge, red glows, white flashes, tracer arcs blue as glacier ice. You could taste metal with every breath. By the second day, our colony's perimeter had shrunk to the industrial core, Habitats burned on the horizon, geysering insulation fluff. But the Legion was bleeding. Slagged walkers littered the plains, and their command cruiser hung at a wounded angle, one vectored thruster spinning sparks. They hadn't expected a populace that could hit back from planetside with weapons a century out of date. Still, superior tech was whittling us down. Water pumps failed, med bays overflowed, people fought with burns wrapped in dirty cloth, adrenaline their only anesthetic. In the main foundry, Camber gathered whoever could stand. Yara projected a hologram of Pyre 4's orbital paths, thin green arcs, mirror shards. Thick red cord, the Legion supply barge, still inbound due to make atmospheric interface by dawn. If that barge lands, they reload and we're finished, Camber said. We have one shot, literally. A mass driver strike from orbit. Take the spare coil gun, fly it up, use the barge as an anvil. Smash them with their own inertia. We stared. A coil gun in vacuum was fine. Getting it there through a skirmish zone was something else. I'll fly, Yara volunteered before anyone else exhaled. I glanced at her, hair singed, eyebrows half gone, hands trembling from stimulant withdrawal, but her eyes were clear glass. She meant it. Camber nodded once. Form a crew, 10 minutes. We rigged Coilgun 5, smallest of the rails, onto a cargo shuttle, gutted for weight. The barrel jutted out the bow like a pike. Capacitors were strapped down with tow chains. Slug magazines, each rod, hand-greased, lined the deck in foam cradles. I took nav. Yara took helm. June handled power feeds. The hangar doors were already half melted, so when we fired thrusters, superheated air screamed inside, spinning vortices of soot. We punched through clouds at 13 Gs, bones creaking. Behind us, we left a contrail laced with embers from engine backwash. Legion drones arced to intercept, but Camber flooded comms with sensor ghosts, spoof echoes bouncing across every frequency. The drones hesitated just enough. Space embraced us. Zakin uncaring. Below, Pyres 4's nightside glimmered with fires. Above, the mirror ray looked like the broken shell of a silvered egg. Its caretaker tugs blazed attitude jets, rustling segments into alignment for one last burn. Our shuttle barreled past them toward the Legion barge, a kilometer-long cylinder framed by docking spokes, shimmering with shield energy. Range 900 clicks. Spin up capacitors, Yara ordered. June armed the banks. Electromagnetic hum filled the cabin, a sound halfway between a heartbeat and a storm. The barge launched defensive warheads, smart rockets with sapphire noses, each cycling its own evasive algorithm. Yara juked us on thrusters too frail for this abuse. The hull rattled like a can in a hailstorm. A rocket skimmed our port side, venting liquid shards. Vacuum sucked one of our radiator fins away. Alarms shrieked. 2 slugs, Yara barked. Crossfire pattern. I keyed trajectory. The shuttle lacked gimbals, so we spun her bodily, centrifugal force slamming us against straps. When crosshair settled, June dumped capacitor charge. The coil gun breathed white fire. The first rod tore free at 7 kilometers per second, a thin silver streak plating itself in plasma. A half-second later, the second slug followed, aimed 50 meters wide so the barge's point defense couldn't track both. One got caught by a railgun, net reduced to vapor with a flower-bright flash. The other drilled straight into the barge's forward bay. There was no explosion, just a ripple, as internal pressure tried to escape through a hole now glowing amber. Then the barge kept drifting. "Did we miss anything vital?" I whispered. Before Yara could answer, the barge's shields flickered off the rod, must have sliced the generator bus. Locking spokes began to tumble, shedding panels like autumn leaves, but it still wasn't enough. Yara pushed throttle into the red. Reload! We had 4 rods left, 2 minutes of survivability tops. I wondered how many of our friends were still alive planetside. I wondered if Camber's makeshift city still breathed under that burning sky. A warning klaxon cut through musings. Collision alert. The barge loomed, one of its tumbling spokes now on a direct course. We couldn't dodge. Thrusters were cooked. "Brace!" Yara yelled. "Impact!" Metal shrieked. The spoke's latticework flattened our starboard side. The coil gun rail warped like licorice. G-forces tossed Jin against the bulkhead. Something cracked inside him. Bone or organs, I never learned. The shuttle began an end-over-extend tumble. Spinning nausea clawed at my throat. Starfield, pirate thirst, Starfield. Everything blurred. Then a voice I almost didn't recognize flooded comms. The soft baritone of Camber Reyes. "Mirror aligned. Time to target. 15 seconds. Get clear." I spat blood and laughed. Clear? We were a crippled tin can pinned to a barge that outweighed us 100-fold. "Do it!" Yara croaked. Her face was painted with floating beads of crimson. "Light 'em up!" From low orbit, solar fire is silent. You see a filament, bright as creation's birth, spider across vacuum. Then the world turns white. The mirror array's final discharge struck the barge dead center. Sunlight, condensed to a column wider than a cathedral, bored through alloy, propellant tanks, cryobunkers. The barge flashed incandescent, hull sublimating to vapor that instantaneously ionized. Our shuttle was spiderwebbed by shadeluck or physics, kept us in the umbra for 2 blessed seconds. Then shock waves of ionized gas punched what remained of our craft like a fist. In the glare, I saw the sky alive with reflections, because the beam, after coring the barge, ricocheted off glittering fragments of Legion flak dust. Ray upon ray split, scattered, rebounded. The vacuum between orbits turned into a crystalline storm of light, each shard carving graceful arcs that intersected hulls, drones, the wounded cruiser itself. It was as if we'd shattered a sun, and every piece wanted vengeance. On Pyre 4, they said later, night turned brighter than day. Children swore they could see their own skeletons outlined on the ground. The Legion's ground offensive froze, every visor blooming with overload static as sensors fried. Their dropships lost gyros, spiraled, cratered. A moment stretched into eternity, and then, just like that, the Legion began to die. But I woke. I floated in a coffin of wreckage, half the shuttle's cockpit, sealed only by frozen spittle of alloy. Yara was beside me, suit rigid, visor dark. June was gone, sucked out, or buried under slag. Pyre 4 hung below, patched with storm clouds and ember dots where fields still burned. Above, the mirror array was a smear of drifting debris, but Legion icons. Red triangles blinked out one by one on the battered sensor screen. Escape trajectories surged, irregular and sloppy. They were running. I cycled the emergency beacon, throat raw. "This is Reyes Orbital Gunship." I laughed at the grandiose name. "To Colony Base, Legion Force in retreat. Repeat, in retreat." Static answered, then cheers, sobbing, overlapping shouts. Somewhere someone played music. Old Earth jazz skipping through packet loss. I closed my eyes. Recovery took weeks. Scavenger crews sifted battle sites, pulling survivors from ruptured drop pods, welding plates over atmosphere leaks. The Legion left behind mountains of tech melted, yes, but ours to dissect. Their charter house would think twice before sending another repossession fleet this far. Word spread through back channels. Pyre 5 stood unbroken. Other fringe outposts sent messages of solidarity, offers of trade, of alliance. We buried our dead at cliff's edge, where the basalt meets the sky. Camber spoke, voice still hoarse. "They called us rust farmers," she said. They forgot rust is just iron waiting for purpose. Yara was there, arm in sling, eyes distant. The doctors said she'd never fly again. The burns on her spinal column were too deep. She only shrugged. There were other jobs. The colony needed architects now, needed to rebuild. I was back in Bay 4A, guiding a lathe to craft irrigation pipes from Legion hull steel, when a runner handed me a scrap of paper stationery salvage from some officers' quarters. First Coilgun salvo launched, T-0, Remember the sound it made." I smiled, tucked the note into my chest pocket. Outside, the wind carried the smell of rain, first storm since the battle, and the fields were already seeded. At dusk, Pi of Four's sun dipped behind fractured mirror shards, still tracing their ghost orbits. Each caught the light, only briefly, and sent it skipping across the darkening sky, 1,000 tiny reflections, echoing the day we caught the sun and made it ours.